And welcome to Thrift Shop Biography. This is the one about Richard Pryor. Thank you for listening. Hello, Cleo.
Oh, hello, Richard.
How are you?
Okay, how are you?
Yeah, I'm all right, thanks.
Good.
So, I found the autobiography of Mr. Richard Pryor.
Yes.
Prior Convictions and Other Life Sentences. Did you enjoy it?
I did, actually. Yeah, I really did.
Did you know much about him before we read it?
No, as a kid, I was introduced to him through Superman 3.
Yeah.
Which I've now discovered that is a really crap film.
Yeah.
But when I was a kid, it was Superman.
Mm-hmm.
I couldn't get enough of it. And then The Wiz. He is The Wiz. Wizard of
okay.
Oz. And he's hilarious. And I now know he was absolutely off his face hallucinating himself as the devil whilst being the Wizard of Oz. Which is completely news to me. I didn't realise he was a terrible... I didn't know anything about him. Terrible drug addict, I was going to say.
Yeah, one of the few things I did know about him was his drug addictions, but I didn't realise the extent of them.
No.
Wow. It's amazing he ever got anything done.
Yeah, it's as Motley Crue and Matthew Perry as the next man.
Okay.
Yeah.
Shall we get into this one-man Motley Crue?
Let's do it.
So this is in Illinois, Peoria. Peoria?
Yes.
Illinois. I mean, his mom was quite vocal about the fact she didn't want to get pregnant and she didn't want a baby, but she had him.
Yeah, her grandma, he actually calls Mama.
Marie.
She's like the main mother figure to him.
Yeah.
Isn't she? She's the stable one. And she's running whorehouses. She's obviously hard as a brick. And she was one of 21 children.
Yeah, wow.
And she came from a time of rage, fear, weariness. It said a really hard upbringing. Ku Klux Klan were all around. There's murders, hangings. That's her background. And in that, she's obviously running a whorehouse and she's having kids. One of her kids is Richard Pryor's mum. And she drinks, she's a whore, she comes and goes in and out of their lives. The dad's just somebody from the town who's sleeping with the whore. He says, my dad just wanted pussy. He didn't want to be a dad. The mum obviously doesn't want to be a mum, and that's what he's born into.
And he kind of says that people would say to him when he was a kid, oh, it's so sad that your mum went. But he kind of almost preferred it when she was there. And when she reappeared, he loved it. But he didn't feel like, oh, boo-hoo-hoo, my mum has gone.
Didn't know any different, did he?
Yeah.
And there's a point where his dad went off to join the army. And at some point, this man walks into the whorehouse with a uniform and he thinks, this man acts like he owns the place. And he goes upstairs, he comes down in civilian clothes and he goes, oh my God, it's my dad.
Yeah.
But none of them really talk to him. They don't talk to him as an equal or try and raise him. They just, oh, shut up. You're an idiot. Stop asking questions. They don't really care for him.
He talks to the punters in the whorehouse.
Yeah.
It's amazing that he got to actually grow up. I suppose the authorities didn't care at that point about black people in that area of town. They weren't being looked after.
No.
But I was just about to say, it seems like he was okay, but actually he wasn't.
He wasn't okay.
He wasn't.
His whole life is a thing about basically he doesn't love himself, so he can't love anyone else. Whenever he has therapy or it breaks down to nobody loved me, you didn't love me. None of these people did. They didn't look after him. It's just the saddest thing when they go off to ball games and they're all dressed up and go to ball games and he's thinking he's going to go this time and they go, what are you dressed up like that for? You're not coming.
Yeah.
And he waves them off and then cries because he doesn't ever want them to see him cry. It's pretty tragic. It
is, and actually he's also surrounded by a lot of violence, not just sex in the whorehouse, because he said that when his dad did come back from the war, and Richard Pryor is only like 5 or 6. He's seen his dad shoot men. Anybody who played up in the whorehouse, or his dad and another guy, they would physically beat people up. And of course, this little 5-year-old who nobody really cares about is just like a fly on the wall, watching everything. Oh, and he actually said as well, he would crawl when he kind of got old enough to figure out what was going on. He would crawl through the air vents and spy on the men with the prostitutes, not quite knowing what was happening to begin with.
He said he saw a white man having sex with his mother, which really fucked him up, to quote him. And he saw everything. He saw way too much, which totally has warped his mind.
Yeah.
I mean, at one point he sees his dad hit his mum while he's in the room, and his mum goes, oh, don't you be doing that. Don't stand there and
don't say this.
You don't want me to say it because it's going to hurt you,
oh
isn't it?
My God.
And he hits her again. She's like, that's a bad mistake. And she grabs his balls with her claw-like fingers and she ripped off his balls.
Fucking hell.
And he's running up the street, blood everywhere.
He's running up the street.
Going, Mama,
Mummy.
Mama.
Crying
What's
for
his
his
mum?
mum. Damn.
I don't know why we're laughing at it. It's awful. So, yeah, serious violence. Bloody hell.
Ugh, got him.
But then he says also he's seen his dad beating up many whores. That's just normal. That's what he grew up with. Men beat women.
Yeah.
Because he self-confessed has beaten every woman he's ever been with.
I know every time he gets with a new he has so many partners in this book. Like, by the time he gets to the sixth one, you just think, I'll just give up. But by the time he starts hitting the sixth one, it's like, this is just a recurring...
Yeah. Pummeled. He uses the word pummeled a lot. He says, it seems to be my recurring pattern. I pummel women and then I beg them to take me back. Mind you, they fight back. Oh, God, it's messed up.
Yes, it is.
It's right messed up. Yeah.
But he managed to get some good comedy out of it. So.
Do you know what he did? And he represents a lot of people's experience and he was their voice. Anyway, so yeah, this is quite harsh. The early days are harsh.
Yeah, so should we also, if we're talking about harsh stuff, we should also say that at the age of 6, he was raped by a paedophile.
Yeah. It's hard to know if that happened repeatedly or not. It seemed that it might have happened repeatedly.
Do you know what? When I read that, I just kind of think good on him, really, for admitting this in his autobiography, because I don't think a lot of men talk about that type of abuse.
No, they don't.
And
he said he absolutely never told a soul for decades. Kept that completely secret.
Because when I read it, I was so surprised that he revealed that this had happened to him.
Yeah.
Yeah, I had so much respect for him.
Yeah, and then he thought everyone knew, and he's absolutely convinced his dad knew, because some other bloke had come up and said, stop sucking his dick. Like, they knew. And it just made him utterly ashamed.
It is weird because then when he's a couple of years older and a priest comes on to him, his dad and his dad's friend actually decide to turn that into a blackmailing opportunity.
Yeah.
They said to little Richard, give him the phone number, and they knew the priest was going to call the house. And they actually got this little 10-year-old Richard to talk to the priest on the phone, seduce him so that the older men could then blackmail him for money. It was only when the grandmother overheard what was happening that she put a stop to it.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just there's no level of care for this little boy.
No.
Apart from his grandmother, I guess.
Yeah, to a point, but she's still running a whorehouse. I mean, he still has to open the door when he's a little kid and there's a white man going, is your mother in? I want a blowjob, And he said the mayor of the town would come up and go, have you got any little girls that can cover me in cream and little boys that can lick it off? By the way, I shouldn't just say white people or black people. I mean, he makes amazing valid points about race. His experience is due to his race, but he says he didn't see colour, and he never did for his whole life. And he wishes everyone could just realise that we're all the same. We're all just people.
Yeah, it would be nice if we could make everybody...
Yeah. I'm only actually repeating what he said.
Oh, no, yeah, I know.
So it was everybody. It was all going on in their place.
No men come out of this book with any ounce of redemption, including himself. He is just there. They just
especially himself, things. Really.
Yeah.
Except, of course, and it doesn't excuse it, but it explains him. This book does. I mean, it didn't stand a bloody chance in some ways. And what's so sad is he's clearly a massive brain. He ends up going to a Catholic school and he excelled. He says
Straight
he completely
A's.
excelled. Yeah. He was doing so well. They were really nurturing him. And then they found out his family ran a whorehouse. And they expelled him straight away as soon as they knew. And then he couldn't understand why they would do that to him. He says, he hasn't done anything. But he's really a clever. I mean, you can't do comedy. And the stuff that's coming out of his head, he's a massive brain, isn't he?
Yeah, and he's writing as well. And he's really switched on.
Yeah.
So when he was expelled from that school, at the age of 12, he went to another school, which was predominantly white. And the teachers there's one teacher in particular, Miss Parker, who kind of got that he was a bit of a live wire, but also got that he was very bright. And she said to him, if you work hard, you can stand in front of the class and tell some jokes. And that was such good mentoring,
That's
isn't it?
That's the right bribe to give him.
Yeah.
It's nice that she gets name checked because that is the first person that spots his talent. Yeah. And encourages it. And then he learned a lot because he wanted to be given the chance to tell jokes.
So he became known as the funny guy around school But unfortunately, of course, let's not forget he is black in a predominantly white school. Some of the teachers didn't like it and they thought he was a bit above his station, you know. And there was a male teacher who did take umbrage of him being loud and telling jokes, and he got him by the scruff of the neck, dragged him outside the classroom, and Richard at the age of 14 went to punch him just as a reaction. And of course, that got him expelled from school. And when he went home to the whorehouse and said, "Hey, Dad, I've been expelled from school," he said, "Well, you're 14 now. As of tomorrow, you pay your way here." So he quite quickly then had to become a man and go and get a job and stuff.
So where does he get a job? As a cleaner in a strip club. He's 14. He said, "I was more interested in the show than the cleaning."
Yeah, of course.
Oh my God, no wonder his brain's warped with women and stuff. Because seriously, of course it is. It's warped. But anyway, then he got a job at... No, these are terrible jobs. It was in a packing company for beef, and they were just whacking bulls over the head with a sledgehammer.
Do you know what? Obviously, we're both anti the meat industry.
Yeah, and a bit soft, yeah.
The one thing that I totally believe is that people who have those jobs executing animals, part of that job, there should be a healthcare program where you go for therapy.
Yeah.
I don't believe anybody who spends all day killing animals comes out of that unscathed. It's such a horrible thing to have to do.
Yeah, where you have to shut down part of you and disassociate it with having feelings. Otherwise, you'd go mad. Anyway.
Hey, I didn't get at this point when he's doing these jobs. He says he gets into a bit of petty crime, but also he's seeing this girl who becomes pregnant. It's said that any number of men could have been the father of that child, including my own dad.
His dad, yeah, he was only 16 when this girl had a kid. Yeah, she'd been sleeping around with everybody, including her dad. I guess she was probably maybe working at the family business.
Okay.
Maybe.
Because then his granny took him to one side and said, "This is not your child, so don't be taken in by it." But he still continued to see that child. Granny said, "I still kept in touch with her." So I didn't quite get, reading the book, whether deep down he felt it was his child. Because otherwise, why would he still keep in touch with it?
He said that girl grew up with her mother and grandmother, and I didn't need to bother with it. Only sort of maybe his last child is the only one he was sober for and was there for.
Right.
He made children and ran away as another repeated pattern throughout his life, because that's just the way it was. He says that. It's the way it was. He could move on. The next girl he gets pregnant, which he did, he realised that he didn't want to be with her either. I think he married her. Yeah, he did, the next one. And then they weren't getting on. And so he went, "Oh, I'm going to leave because I can." And off he goes.
Yeah. So at the age of 18 in 1958, he volunteered for the army.
Yes.
And they shipped him off to Germany.
Yeah, and he's thinking, great, I'll get pussy there. That's his main aim of his whole life, right to death.
Well, he grew up in a whorehouse.
Well, exactly. And he goes there and he thinks it'll be different, but they're still, using the N-word like his officers are. And he's like, oh, it's like that, is it? And then finds out there's only 3 bars out of 150 that will let black people in.
Yeah, right.
So it's really just as racist as anywhere else in Germany in the 50s. Which is very disappointing for him.
He does say as well that even within the army, obviously, there's a lot of racism. And one night they're all watching a film and one of the black guys is taunted. So he gets into quite a big fist fight with one of the other soldiers. And then it turns into a brawl. And then Richard Pryor says he had a flick knife. So he gets a flick knife out and he jumps on this white guy and he stabs him in the back 6 or 7 times. And then obviously he realizes what he's doing. He runs back to the barracks. He throws a knife into the hedge. And then he said the guy came in with the officers saying it was him. And he said, "No, it wasn't me. It wasn't me. It was the other black guy, whatever." And he said this guy was just dripping
why isn't
with
he dead?
blood. Why isn't he dead? But then he got called in front of his senior officers and they discharged him. But wow, he actually
sort of attempted murder in that time.
Yeah. And he's like 18, 19.
But he said he's basically been sent to kill class.
Actually,
they'd actually
right.
taught him to kill. They taught them all to kill. So there was all this pent up testosterone.
Yeah, but I think that's another huge admission in this book.
Yes.
That's
I agree.
surprising that you would admit that you almost killed someone.
There's another point in his youth when he's still hanging around the whorehouse. It's not just a whorehouse, by the way. There's bars. There's a bar his grandma owns. There's a trucking business, a beauty salon. They've got all sorts of little businesses. But there's a point where some bloke's kicking off in the bar and his grandma shoots this man about 8 times. But he doesn't die. He manages to crawl across the bar and slice his dad's ankle, which made his dad have a hobble for the rest of his life. And the man who was shot 8 times survived fine.
Yeah. I think he said the next time he saw them, him and his dad were having a drink together and laughing.
Yeah. And he said, this taught me the lesson. Assholes don't die. They multiply.
Yeah, right.
That's another classic, probably a catchphrase if you're a Richard Pryor fan, where he's turned some hideous, crazy times into comedy.
A lot of this book is actually in italics, which makes me think that's his routine.
Yeah,
that
I think
he would say that's him turning his life story into comedy.
Yeah,
right?
and that's where you see how he's moulded it into an act. But you don't have to be a psychologist to see right through it to the truth. It almost seems baffling now that you could sit and go, ha ha, oh, that's funny, because it's reality.
Yeah.
It's not much disguised. And he says when he goes home and talks to his family, they're like, you owe me a lot of money because all of that is my act.
Yeah.
I gave you all this material. That's me talking.
So when he's discharged from the army, he goes back to Peoria, Illinois, back to his family home, stroke whorehouse. Obviously, it's all part of the club scene. And there's a club called Harold's Club. And he goes down there and sees what's going on. And he says, give me a job. And Harold says to him, what do you do? And he says, I sing and play the piano. Or did Harold say to him, do you sit by me?
No, I don't know, but he thought that was what the job would be.
Yeah.
So he said it and he didn't do either.
He didn't do either, but he got a job as a singer and the piano player. And he actually sat down at the piano, and he said he knew about 4 chords on the piano. He just repeated them and improvised singing. But within that, he started making it funny. But there was it Sonny Stinson who was like the main draw who would come with his band. So they had proper musical entertainment. But in between Sonny Stinson's sets, Richard Pryor would get back on the piano and just wing it. Harold said to him after the end of the first night, something along the lines of, you have no idea what you're doing.
It's like, you've got more balls than anyone I've ever seen up here. You can come back.
Come back again.
Yeah. And then after a while, he realised it was better if he just told jokes.
Yeah, he said he realised that his jokes were landing better than the comedy piano playing. So yeah, he evolved into a comedian. Well, he was a comedian. He was just finding his comedy.
He was. And sometimes he even said he sat there and just read the paper and made comments on it, but like relating everything to the black experience. Mm-hmm. And everyone just loved it because I guess nobody had. Well, they probably did because there's always someone who's been before. But
yeah, there was Red Fox before him.
Yeah, because there's a Eddie Murphy film that he did way later, and he said there was 3 generations of comedians. It was Harlem Nights. It was Eddie Murphy and him and Red Fox. So yeah, that's one person before him that we know of. Mm-hmm. But hey, there's always been everybody.
So he also said Sonny Stinson, while they were sharing that bill together, he was the first person who gave Richard Pryor drugs. He would give him some weed and a couple of uppers, and he got into it quite quickly, didn't he?
Yeah.
That's one thing, actually. You could say growing up in the environment that he did, there was a lot of sex, there was a lot of violence. He did not mention drugs once, did he?
No, not in the early years, no.
So it was when he was like 19, 20 in this club that he was introduced to drugs.
Yeah, he took to it like a duck to water.
So then this woman called Patricia starts knocking around. She gets pregnant quite quick, and then
another kid is born that he doesn't care about at all, and then he leaves her.
So it's 1962, and he actually goes and gets work in other clubs now, and a proprietor of another club actually sees his act and thinks, hey, he'd make a good MC, actually. So already he's being recognised, getting better jobs, better money.
You know what he says when he's a kid? He said, you know how other people sing all the time if they've got a voice? He talked all the time. Mm-hmm. Couldn't stop him talking. That's good, isn't it? It's like him honing his act. He just can't shut up.
Yeah.
And it turns into a living.
And he's hanging out with the other performers, like the singers and the drag queens. So he's getting a nice little social thing, camaraderie with other performers. And then he beats up a prostitute.
Yeah.
and has to leave town, basically. Oh, this is where his dad...
Yes.
So he beats up this woman, says, hit me.
Yes.
And he doesn't.
He takes it way too far and totally beats her up. Then she's complaining to his dad, and his dad goes, "Don't you know how to hit a horse, son?"
Yeah.
You're out.
Yeah, because he beats her up really badly.
Yeah, no, he's grown up watching men beat a horse, so he has had a training in it.
But even so, you would kind of know if you're beating up a woman to the point where there's a lot of blood.
Oh, come on.
She's not really, you know that's wrong.
No, yes, it's wrong.
I mean, it's wrong anyway, but growing up in the environment he grew up in, if your dad is saying to you, you don't know the right way to beat a whore.
Yeah, exactly. There is a right way, apparently.
There's more than one way of beating a whore.
Apparently. Well, we're only bloody repeating what is a very dark book full of darkness.
So, after beating a whore, the singers at the club and the drag queens are actually going to another town for more gigs, and they say to him, "Why don't you come with us?" So he actually now is leaving Illinois.
Yeah, he got lucky because a really terrible incident turned into the stepping point he needed to get out.
And then he gets on this thing called the Black Belt Circuit, which I was unaware of, but it sounds like the circuit around
circuit
America.
For the music, the comedy version.
Yeah. And he talked about it before this happened, but he quite soon got on to the Black Belt Circuit, which means he's now effectively on tour, and he's going to lots of different states and playing shows and really honing his craft, actually. That's the thing with comedy, isn't it? The more you do it, the more different audiences you're seeing. So he's getting good.
But I mean, he's honed it from school. I mean, like Roseanne we read, she just didn't know she was going to do comedy until she was like a mother of three and a proper housewife.
She's about 30, I think.
Yes, and he was doing it at school. Yeah. I mean, he knew.
Yeah, and then he's in Pittsburgh on tour, and then he just so happens to get with this female singer. Then he beats her up, ends up sentenced to 90 days in jail, but only does 30. So, like we said, this is a recurring thing.
That's the repeated pattern. Some he marries, he always divorces, marries again, divorces, lots of kids come along. And by the end of his life, well, by the end of this book, they all are still around him. They're all caring for him.
Money.
Do you think that's it?
He's a multi-millionaire.
Yeah, you're right. Good point.
I mean, I hate to say that, but I think there is a reality of it. And I think if a woman has been deeply wronged by a man...
And has kids.
Yeah, I think they should have his money, actually.
Oh, yeah, they should. But there does seem to be love. They do seem to be worrying about him, taking him to hospitals, things they don't have to do if they were just mercenary. You know, phoning him, checking he's all right, you know, all of that.
Yeah, I guess it's complicated when it comes to...
You know, Rod Stewart kept all his women around him to the end.
Apart from Britt Eklund, who went so mad her hair fell out.
Oh, yeah. Anyway, so that's the women covered. Let's move on.
So, after coming out of jail for 30 days after beating up that woman, he's touring again. And actually then he's in Toronto. And it's while he's in Toronto that he sees a copy of Newsweek magazine, and Bill Cosby is on the front cover. Now, this is 1963. Because you and I would have become aware of Richard Pryor and Bill Cosby in the 1980s.
Yes.
It does blow my mind a bit to know that they were up and coming in 1963.
I agree. I never thought of it. Yeah.
But when Richard Pryor sees Bill Cosby on the front of Newsweek, he's like, I can't believe he's getting there before me. I want to be the only black comic. Yeah. And he's being usurped by Bill Cosby's rise. So a friend says to him, if you want to be as big as Bill Cosby, you have to go to New York. It's the only place this is going to happen. And so off he goes, and the first thing he does is go to the Apollo Theatre.
It's all he knows to.
Yeah, and says, hey, put me on. They're like,
straight
no.
to the top.
Yeah.
And they said, no, you've got to go to the Village. And he's like, I've come all the way to the biggest city in America. Why you send me to a village? So ends up in Greenwich. And it's Cafe Wha again.
Yeah, I know, right?
I love that.
Amazing.
So it was Van Halen that started there. And that lot, wasn't it? Who else has come up there? Oh, it's everybody.
It's
Bob Dylan.
Bill Dylan.
Van Halen's uncle ended up owning it.
David Lee Roth.
Yes,
Hang on.
It was David Lee Roth's uncle owned it.
Manny Roth is the owner of Cafe Wha, and that's David Lee Roth's
uncle. Yeah. So, but yeah, Nina Simone. It was Bob Dylan, that whole scene. And it was like, do you remember Nina Simone saying that Richard Pryor was so scared?
Oh, yeah.
And he was trembling so much she had to hug him until he calmed down every single night. He doesn't tell us that.
No, he doesn't tell us that.
No, he never tells us he's that scared. He just seems like he's a natural comic.
Wow. And to think that he is there, because you think of Greenwich Village, that whole scene, as music, actually. It's Bob Dylan, it's Nina Simone, but actually the comedians were there as well.
Yeah, they're all interspersed. Yeah, it's like later on he says he's doing Vegas and the OJs are his support act. Yeah. What a night. It's brilliant.
And so he is playing all the clubs and stuff in the village and getting around and getting his name known. And then I think he bumps into Bill Cosby again. Then he gets a support slot at the Apollo Theatre, right? Who was the headliner at the Apollo Theatre?
Billy Eckstein.
That's right. And he says to Bill Cosby, I've got a slot at the Apollo Theatre. My name's on the billboard. Come with me. And Bill Cosby's like, okay, I'll come with you.
Really nice, really supportive, yeah.
And then when they pull up outside the Apollo Theatre, it says Billy Eckstein in big lights plus support act.
Yeah. Supporting artist, something like that.
And Bill Cosby said, I thought you said your name was outside. He goes, yeah, I'm the supporting artist. But then he says that lots of people think it was Bill Cosby who kind of brought Richard Pryor to the next level. Actually, he said it was a hooker in Baltimore who brought out an LP.
Oh, yeah,
and
that's
true. It was the Lenny Bruce set.
Yes.
And Richard Pryor said when he listened to that, it was like, wow, I can be political and funny and really have something to say.
Yeah. So this is the man that switched Roseanne on to comedy, yeah? We need to investigate him.
I've got his autobiography. I found it.
Oh,
so we need to do him at some point.
Yeah, look, if we're really delving into comedy, he's clearly one of the root sources. Yes. Okay, good. I meant to look up Tia Maria. Why have I heard of her?
It's a drink.
Yeah. Yes.
It's a liqueur.
That's why.
Oh, my word.
Is she not also really famous?
Are you thinking of Tia Carrera?
I don't know. Did she ever go out with Rick James? Or is that...
There's probably somebody called Tia. Well, there is somebody called Tia
Maria. Yeah, I know.
But what could she be? The Tia Maria?
No, that could be Tina Marie.
There was a disco singer called Tina Marie.
It might be that she might have gone out with Rick James.
There is a religious figure called Ave Maria.
Could be that I was thinking of. All right, Tia Maria's a great name. I mean, obviously.
What about her anyway?
Well, anyway, he met her, and she got him into coke, which was the beginning.
Tia Maria and coke.
She's a hooker, a drink, and coke. It's a good night out. She got him into the drugs. The hardcore drugs.
He never needed much persuading, did he, when it came to drugs? No. And always the first time he tried a new drug, it was like, okay, I'm here for it. Yeah. Well, drugs are good, let's face it. Oh, I shouldn't. I mean, don't do them, obviously.
No.
But I understand totally why people like them.
Yeah, especially if you don't want to be conscious, if you don't like where your mind is and you love it being taken away. Of course, the misery is if you get into it daily, it ceases really to have the effect, and it just makes you absolutely miserable and depressed and suicidal, and it's hideous. So it always seems nice the first time, and then it goes to pot.
Yay! Yeah, but you know what? He's got many reasons why he would want to get out of his head.
He has. From almost really this point on, he's absolutely off his face for the rest of his life. Where the book ends, he's then got multiple sclerosis and the onset. He actually lives another 13 years with that, without being able to perform, which is really quite tragic, that is. I imagine he's still off his face right to the end.
I mean, you'd want to be at that point.
Yeah, exactly. So basically, from this point on, he's off his face, and he still manages to be so productive. It's absolutely incredible.
It's an energy thing again. He just has a really high level of energy. So at this point, he's actually getting onto TV. He has his first TV appearances, and he does a Merv Griffin show, which basically, TV in America in 1964, that's 50 million people watching you, because there's not cable or anything yet. You kind of have to watch what they're putting on. Yeah. So he's hit the mainstream. But he's also hitting the drugs. But here's the thing about the drugs, is that as soon as he starts taking them, he does talk about how paranoid and stuff they make him. So he's clearly not in a great frame of mind anyway. And as much as he gets released from the drugs, they also exacerbate his demons.
That's right. And yet he's still hilarious to everybody. I don't comprehend it.
I mean, I don't know if this is him exaggerating, But he says in his bedroom, he ends up putting 12 locks on the door just so he feels secure when he's off his head. Because he thought he just had visions of all these people from his past life, the pimps, or the people he owed money to, the guy he stabbed in Germany, his dad even. He just has visions of them all coming to get him. His paranoia is real.
Yeah.
And so when he gets high, he puts 12 locks on his door.
Yeah, I bet he did. I bet he did.
I mean, that's not the sign of a sane man, even at this point, is it?
No. You know what worries me? The hinges are probably weak.
Yeah,
Everyone
right.
looks after one side of the door, what about the other side?
Perhaps he had 6 on one side.
I hope so.
But he said it actually was so bad at this point and he was off his head for so long that he was booked on the Ed Sullivan Show, which is a big deal. And he missed it because he was just high in his bedroom. Yeah. Elvis didn't miss it, did he? And he was a drug addict.
Yeah, not that bad at that point.
And the Beatles. And the Mamas and the Papas, all famously on the Ed Sullivan Show.
Yes.
All famously drug addicts.
But I think he did the week after. He got $500, which was a lot of money for him then.
Mm-hmm.
Bloody hell, though, that coke, he must have spent millions on it.
Oh, throughout his whole life? $250,000.
Oh, is that all?
Oh.
You'd have thought it'd be more.
You've got to allow for inflation if you're thinking about it in terms of money today.
Good point.
So that would be 10 million maybe.
Yeah, and that's only coke. That's not maybe the rocks or the
and that's only the stuff
everything
he
else.
Bought. Maybe he was getting high on other people's supply as well.
Good point. All right, carry on.
And if he was buying it in bulk, he would have got a discount.
That's true.
And is it coming from Pablo Escobar?
Yeah, again, he's keeping Pablo Escobar in speedboats and jet skis and giraffes.
So he is mainstream now and he gets to Vegas. And it's there that he meets, obviously, all the other stars and stuff know who he is and they come and see him. And Sid Caesar comes and he's the first person that says, you need to get into movies. Yeah. I didn't realise his movie career started so early in 1967.
And he was opening for Bobby Darin, so that music thing again. Mm-hmm. And Groucho Marx came to see him?
Karl Marx, I think.
Stop it. And it was Groucho that actually said to him, where do you see your career going? And do you go to the theatre? Do you read books? Do you read plays? And he's going, nope. And it's not because you have to do these middle-class things. Quentin Crisp says, going to the theatre is like drinking life through a straw. You should just be living your stories, not have to sit and watch it. I like that. But he has got a massive brain. And so he actually takes that on board and starts reading and thinking. And who does he meet? He meets somebody at some point who gets him into Malcolm X because he used to be friends with him. So he starts reading Malcolm X and actually really getting a bit more political and just thinking more. It's good for him because he is an intellectual. He's been ignoring that side of himself. Around that time, he says he's feeling worthless and feeling really shit about himself and realising he didn't know who he was, which is a repeated thought in this whole book. But that's why he's searching. Yeah. Sometimes it's usually drugs and whores, but sometimes it's actually books and thinking or just really interesting people to talk to.
Yeah, it's just a shame he spent so much time on the drugs and the whores. If he'd only gone to the books and the people.
Well, like you say, though, it's a shame, but he's still Richard Pryor.
Yeah.
He still did it.
The woman he's with at the moment is called Maxine. She gets pregnant, which makes him flee to Mexico.
Yeah, he drives to Tijuana, parties with whores. On his way back, he gets pulled over because he's black and searched, and they find not even enough weed to roll one joint with, and that gets him arrested. By the time he remembers he's got 75 grand in his pocket to pay his own bail, his kid's been born.
Yeah, Elizabeth.
And she won't forgive that, so off he goes again.
Off he goes again, and he goes to Hollywood. So it's 1967, he's in Hollywood and he's still doing truckloads of cocaine. And then he was staying in a hotel and he beat up the guy working on the front desk.
Yeah, he doesn't really remember it, but that got him jailed as well. Yeah. Then he gets sued and Maxine's suing him for child support. So it keeps feeling like it's the world versus him. Yeah.
And then he gets the biggest gig of his career so far at a place called the Aladdin in Las Vegas. Do you know this place?
Yes.
Okay, I've never heard of it.
Is it still there, I wonder? Not sure it is.
This is a big deal, this gig. And he comes out and everybody's out to see him because his reputation is growing. He's a real brilliant comic at this point, been on TV, part of the mainstream. He comes out and he sees Dean Martin sat right at the front. He's like, oh, Dean Martin's come to see me, and I think the imposter syndrome kicks
he's
in,
like,
doesn't
what's
it?
he looking at? Who's he looking at? Is there anyone else here that's worth something? We can't be looking at me. He can't be looking at Richard Pryor because I don't even know who Richard Pryor is. Yeah, he has a total breakdown, basically.
He just says...
Existential crisis.
Yeah, he just says, what the fuck am I doing here? And he walks off stage.
Yeah.
And of course, his agent
Good grief.
is livid and says, you will never work in this town again, which has been shouted at lots of very successful people. Yeah, he kind of crashed and burned.
He realised it was time to reset himself, find out who he was, and then start doing comedy that meant something to him, that represented something. Because he said up to that point he was copying Bill Cosby. He went after the money, and going after the money meant totally copying Bill Cosby's, not his material, but his delivery. He keeps saying that Bill Cosby is white. He's like, it's for white people. And he realised he had to stop, reassess, and get to the truth of things and be more about the black experience. And so that's what he did. So he actually needed to break down in order to rebuild.
So here's a big revelation in this book. So he's at a club one night watching Miles Davis play. And then when he goes backstage, he says he walks in on Miles Davis snogging Dizzy Gillespie.
Tongue snogging, he said.
Yeah, what other type of snogging is there?
Well, I mean, you can be more or less into it.
Did you know this?
No clue.
So that's...
Yeah, I know. I just breezed past that. I was like, oh, yeah. This is nothing compared to the rest of the book.
Yeah, I was surprised at that. I had no inkling that Miles Davis was gay for Dizzy Gillespie.
Why would you ever think that?
Yeah, I know. That starts a years-long friendship with Miles Davis.
Well, yes, he was supposed to be supporting Miles Davis, and Miles Davis was obviously the main act. And then he got a word that Miles Davis said, I'm going on first. And that was just to show his support, because he'd had that breakdown and that he was coming back with new material, and it was like really risky and he was really scared. And that was Miles Davis supporting him, saying, you can be the bigger man. I'm giving you the headline. That's really nice. So that started it. But they were obviously just great pals. Plus they got absolutely wrecked together.
Yeah, right.
Probably all the women's, he says. Women's and money's.
And, you know, Red Fox is a recurring friend.
Yeah.
And it's actually with him. He's also a massive addict. But actually, it's only at this point in the book in 1969 where Richard Pryor actually writes the words, I was a junkie.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering if it took him to that stage to realise it wasn't recreational drug use anymore. It was a absolute dependency.
Yeah, I think Red Fox had called him a junkie and he just didn't believe it and laughed, and then it starts to sink in.
And this is amazing. This is like 1970.
Yeah.
It's like he still has so many
His
more
career
years
ahead of
being
him.
Hugely successful.
Yeah, it just rises and rises, doesn't he?
Yeah. So anyway, it's around this time, I think he kind of knows everything is getting on top of him. There's an arrest warrant out, another one because he's missing the child support. Also, he's now obviously with another woman called Shelley, who's so mad at him because he's sleeping around and doing all these drugs that actually he just runs away to Berkeley. He gets in a car and drives 10 hours. And it's there where he says Berkeley was an extremely passionate, highly charged, super sophisticated renaissance of black intellectual, artistic and political activity.
Blimey.
And that is a turning point for him, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's not a turning point in terms of doing drugs. He's still doing loads of drugs. In fact, he says when he's at Berkeley, he goes out to the coffee shop in a kimono and a wizard's hat.
Yeah, right.
So he's kind of he's operating on a certain level.
Yeah.
But
he wouldn't have stood out in that community.
He's getting really nourished by, like you say, he's going to these people and absorbing all of the black literature and history and political movements. And it is changing what he says on stage.
Yeah. Got to feed it, haven't you? Comedy. Otherwise, what are you going to say?
Now, this is where he does the famous routine based around the N-word, right?
Yeah.
And so I think other black comedians have used this word on stage, but he's actually really politicizing it. It's more than just a comedy routine.
No. And he tried it with other words. He tried just repeating words just to test it out.
Oh, he said it was like jazz. He would say, because obviously he's off his head, and he said he would get on stage and sometimes would
like
really
riffing on a word, basically.
and say it in 52 different intonations.
Yeah, but the
You're
N
right.
word, he said he was testing it out, saying it different ways, saying it if he could empower himself by numbing everybody to the word and taking away the dismissiveness and the shame of the word. Yeah, he just said it over and over and over again. He became famous for it, and that word crops up in a lot of his albums. It's a really repeated thing. It became a massive part of his act. He was very famous for it. Years later, him going on a trip to Africa, which his therapist told him to do, and he just saw everybody was black. He looked around and he could see people on television and politicians and everyone who worked everywhere and everyone who walked around in business suits, and everybody was black, and there was no N-word. There was dignity, and there was the original people on earth, and he just totally took it back, and he felt so much shame and regret for ever using that word, and he vowed to never say it again, to never demean anybody by using that word. He never said it again, and he said he actually got death threats.
Well,
From
because
the black community, they thought he'd abandoned them.
Yeah.
It wasn't that at all. It was the opposite.
I understand why there was such a backlash when he came back from Africa and kind of almost embraced white people and said we're all the same. Because I think politically, for black people 10 years previously to have seen this stand-up comic use that word and educate everyone, and he was mainstream, so white people would have been listening to that as well. I think he wanted to get away from being Bill Cosby, and he perhaps, as a high-profile comedian, the black people probably saw him and thought, fantastic, somebody is saying this stuff in an intelligent way. Him fighting that fight and then coming back from Africa and saying, hey, I include white people and everything. It's probably the same as if Nina Simone, at the height of her black activism, started singing Barbra Streisand songs, maybe.
I don't know. All I know is, from not being there at the time, but from reading this book, there's such an important journey and an evolution for him to have gone through these phases. And it makes absolute sense the way he saw Africa and then the way he related it to the world and people. It just took a lot of time for other people to catch up with his thinking, didn't it? Because maybe everybody has to go to Africa to have that revelation. They didn't know what he was coming from. Now he could tweet about it, or there's no access to his full interview, or they haven't read his book. They just know he stopped using that word.
Yeah.
They don't know what he's been through.
It is weird. Do you know what? I think that because obviously when we read these books and stuff, I'm forever going onto YouTube and watching the routines and stuff.
Yeah.
It makes me forget that even 10 or 20 years ago, for sure, you never had access to any of that.
Yeah. They didn't have a platform to speak unless it's in your comedy.
Yeah.
And that's a huge platform. Yeah, that's why he's so important, isn't it? It is political. All of his comedy is political.
And I think I totally get, though, at that moment in time, like when he's saying, I embrace the white man, I totally get in the beginning of the 1980s why that was such a divisive thing.
But he wasn't saying that as such. He was saying that everyone's the same. He suddenly realised that people are people. They want love. They want food. They want pussy. This is his words. And he realises that everyone's the same.
Yeah, on one level, but
on
essentially
one level.
they're not.
Their experiences aren't, their opportunities aren't, all of that.
In 1980s America, they're really not.
No, they're not. And yet they are, and that's what he wants to say. That's his next mission, to try and convert people to thinking
I get
like
it.
that.
It's an idealist point of view. And let's not forget also at this point, Richard Pryor is massively successful and has millions of dollars now. So
it's not just ideal, though. It's actually the truth. So it's like if you can get people to listen to that idea, then you can start to shed racism. Like if, exploding it from the core centre of it.
I think in order for that to happen, we have to reset the universe and give everybody the same amount of money, the same house, the same shoes. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, but he's trying a different angle.
I totally get what you're saying. I get what Richard Pryor is saying. I just don't think it can ever really work, unfortunately. I wished it would.
Everyone's got to do their thing, and that's him doing his thing, isn't it?
Yeah.
Well, anyway, that's how he felt. And this is his journey.
He's still on massive coke benders.
He's off his head the whole time.
So around this time, he gets approached to be the piano man in Lady Sings the Blues, the Billie Holiday biopic fronted by Diana Ross.
Yes.
Which I saw very recently
Yes, you
because
did.
we recently read Billie Holiday.
Yeah.
Which I loved.
Yep.
So then you told me, because we'd recently read Diana Ross as well, and I kind of thought, oh, she can't be that good. And you said, no, she is.
Yes.
So I watched it. Oh, bloody hell.
She's amazing.
I don't know why I never expected Diana Ross to be a good actor like that.
She really threw herself into that. And so did Richard Pryor.
I was amazed at him. And in fact, before I read this book, I had a certain image of Richard Pryor in my head. And I was very surprised to actually see how sweet and almost a bit effeminate he was in playing that character. Yeah. It really endeared me to him. So that was a big film, right?
He did that for real, that one. He wasn't playing for laughs at all.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's really for real. Yeah, it was a big film. Yeah, he said he expected a lot more opportunities to come from that. And he sort of makes jokes like he went to see Logan's Run, which is a movie about the future. And there's no black people in it. And he's going, there's proof. White people aren't going to make sure there's no black people in the future. It was like, yeah, funny, but it's not funny. And he's saying that, there just weren't the opportunities. He makes jokes about being cast as King Kong and things like that. There's no parts. And so this was really a time of transition. And him being so popular, because he was mostly releasing record albums of his comedy, and got so hugely popular and doing some TV specials, that he broke a few of those boundaries and got lead roles in films.
His LPs sold 1 million copies.
Yeah.
That's some feat, isn't it, I would think.
And he was saying like teenagers would buy them and then hide them from their parents and things. And that he was really pleased with that. That's what he wanted to be at.
I didn't realise that he co-wrote Blazing Saddles.
Didn't know either. And that's really sad because Mel Brooks obviously loved him and saw his comedy potential and wanted him for the lead sheriff. But Hollywood didn't think...
Yeah. He says it's a shame because his reputation preceded him, obviously. But he said if they'd watched Lady Sings the Blues first, then he would have got that role. But they were both being filmed at the same time, so they didn't realise what he could do.
His films do start to roll in, don't they? He did Greased Lightning, which I've never heard of, with Pam Grier.
Pam Grier is iconic.
Yeah.
Yeah. So in that film, he plays Wendell Scott, who is the stock car racer.
Yeah, I don't know.
I've also never heard of.
I know that he said he was amazed he was playing the lead.
And he has a fling with Pam Grier when they're making them. He doesn't talk about hitting her.
He doesn't. He says they were kind of like a clash of divas because they both wanted to be more famous than each other and that was never going to work. And then he said at that one point he was seeing this woman, Deborah.
He married Deborah, didn't he?
Yeah, well, yeah. But Pam Grier at that point thought he was going to marry her. And then he was also shagging Lucy the decorator. And they all thought that they were the one. But he ended up marrying Deborah, but Lucy was there and Pam Grier turned up at the wedding. Oh my God. Every time he's in one relationship, he's got a variety of others and whores, and they all seem to accept it. There's that one time he says, one of these women, he took them home to meet the parents. It was probably his dad's funeral or something. He was really upset and his mother got him a whore. And so Lucy just sat playing the guitar. It's like, oh my God. Oh, by the way, his dad died. He was only 55 and he was with 5 women at the same time. One of them was only 18 and he had a heart attack in the middle of it. And he says, so he came and went at the same time. That really, really upset him that his dad died. And he started talking to his dad and realised, talking in his head to his dad and realised he never really talked to his dad in his whole life. His grandma died, which absolutely, totally broke him. Anyway, but that's what happens to people.
Yeah.
People die and they have to deal with it and it's horrible.
Yeah, I mean, he had a messed up life. I imagine when his dad and his grandmother died, I mean, not talking to his dad, there was actually so much to talk about his childhood and stuff. And not to be able to have any closure on that, I imagine it just sends him further towards getting off his head.
Yeah.
But while all this is going on, actually NBC offer him a massive TV series, 10 episodes, and he accepts it. But then he realizes that NBC are not going to let him talk about the things he wants to talk about on mainstream TV. So he kind of tries to get out of the deal. And then they hatch an agreement where he ends up just doing 4 episodes, I think. But,
that's right. He said it was just so much pressure. But he got a lot of good comedy out of it. And of course TV gets to everyone. He says, I wasn't black, I wasn't white, I was green. And they can make money out of him.
Yeah, right.
And everyone was coming after him then.
I love this kind of crush he has on Lily Tomlin.
Yeah.
I thought it was so unlikely, but I think he was watching her on stage do her comedy and he was like, wow, she's great. It was like a professional crush.
Yes, and the more he admired her, he totally admired her, but because his mind's warped, he associates sex with everything. He didn't know she was gay.
Yeah.
We know. He didn't know. I doubt she'd come out by then. He was like, yeah, nothing happened. We remain friends.
Yeah, but then like 10 years later, she invites him because she's doing the big gay rights fundraiser at the Hollywood Bowl. And she invites Richard Pryor to come and do a bit. And he ends up just using gay slurs and stuff. And
well, yeah, he decided in his head that some of the black music acts weren't getting treated right or something. And so he walked off and really offended a lot of people. And she stuck up for him.
She says, when you hire Richard Pryor, I guess you get Richard Pryor.
Well, you do, yeah. But he was saying that a lot of the things he thinks held him back with film casting wasn't just racism. It was because he was so volatile. He always swore on and off set. And they just couldn't trust him to.
And you know what it's like in the industry. Everybody would have known he was a full-blown drug addict.
Well, he made it a massive part of his act. That's what he said. He was so open about it. Even freebasing everything. He talked about it all. And if you're filming, you need people to do the same thing over and over. And yet, I just this week watched Stir Crazy.
Yeah.
So I thought, I really need to watch one film. And it's him and Gene Wilder, and he's directed by Sidney Poitier, which is amazing. And oh my God, the comic genius of both of them. You literally, if you watch one, you miss something that the other's doing, and you have to rewind it to watch the other. You can't watch them both at the same time. There's so much going on. It's just slapstick, physical, mental, it's everything. Comedy genius. And that's just one film. And he often says he went back to do other films with them that were a bit crap. And like, were they crap? Everyone loved them.
Yeah, they were huge hits. I don't remember them being crap. He might not have felt fulfilled artistically, maybe, because they were just funny films.
Oh, yeah, he's just being slapstick hilarious. Yeah. But they are slapstick hilarious.
But you know what he said about the filming of one of those with Gene Wilder? Actually, there was a lot of animosity on set because he wouldn't spend time with anybody off set.
He cut himself off.
He rented a cabin 20 miles away in the middle of nowhere and just went there and got fucked on drugs every night.
Yeah, and then started visiting the prison and stuff and befriending the inmates. And then he said after a while he realised that there's a really good reason they're locked up. But I mean, that's what he was doing. He was very, very erratic.
Yeah, I mean, he was doing drugs so heavily, which means he's also not sleeping. Then he himself has a heart attack.
Yeah.
Whilst he's with an ugly whore.
The ugly whore, yeah.
So he's repeating his dad's mistakes. I mean, I guess his dad did make a mistake if he died. Yes, he has a heart attack in the end of the 1970s.
Yeah, I mean, around that time. And then he sets himself on fire, of course. Which he does call a suicide attempt, because that is what it is. He's so off his face, though.
He went mad at that point.
He did. He was hallucinating the devil, and he was talking to the devil, and the devil was him. And he could clearly see himself as the devil. But yeah, he doused himself in booze and then set fire to himself in front of his cousin.
Did you know that he had done this?
No
I was so shocked, because it's funny, because at the beginning of the book, it says something along the lines of, and I set myself on fire. I didn't take it literally when I read it at the beginning of the book. And then at the end, when he describes what happened, I am just so completely shocked.
He's full on fire.
Yeah.
No one can touch him. He's running up the street on fire. That's a long time to be burning. And the way he describes his experience in hospital and the pain and being sponged and the skin grafts and the agony for months and months of rehabilitation. And then being scared to be naked because of the mess his skin's in. Luckily, he says it was from his cock up, nothing below. So he felt blessed. Yeah, that's rock bottom. But sadly, it wasn't, because he went back on the drugs. Nothing can stop him.
The only thing, I mean, I know he's a full-blown addict, but I also kind of thought, after setting yourself on fire, are you not just kind of thinking, okay, I should stop this now? But actually, the pain you would have for so long after that, I totally understand why well, actually, he said when he was in hospital for the burns, one of the nurses says to him, because he was in such agony, she said, we can't administer painkillers unless you ask for them. So he started asking for them.
Yeah, but also he says even when all of this dies down and he's healed, he isn't healed inside. All the pain inside him is still there. So, of course, you just carry on.
Oh my God,
and then,
this.
Well, there's a point where his kids are visiting and he doesn't want to know them, and he suddenly looks outside. He's got his gorgeous house. He can see the ocean twinkling, and there's no reason. He must have seen that a million times, how good his life is with his pool and his land and his house. Suddenly that day had a revelation. Went down to the beach where his kids were, went in the sea. His daughter Rain taught him how to float, and he realised that he had to start again and just be this floating, nothingy person. And it seemed to last for a while. He was sober then for the next birth, but I don't think he was after that. So yeah, he's a full-blown addict. He then is diagnosed with multiple sclerosis,
so sad.
which I was just hoping would cure him. If you've got one debilitating, degenerative disease, you hope that it might sober him up. But of course, why would it? You want to numb that pain as well.
Exactly. And, addiction is as much a debilitating disease as MS is actually. So, if you've got one, you've got to fight the other. He's actually got two massive illnesses now.
He does. Although the other one hasn't stopped him. This one stops his legs working. And he ends up actually going, no, I've got all these ideas in my head. I want to get them out. And he wheelchairs himself onto the stage. And he just finds it exhausting. And he doesn't have the energy. But he's still got all the ideas in his brain. He survives another 12 or 13 years after this book was published. But he can't do his act anymore.
Yeah.
But he says he still wants to write, produce. And I don't know how much he managed to do after that.
Gosh, it's such a remarkable story, isn't it?
Yeah.
Well, it's not a story, it's his life.
So he lived till 65. It's not long. It's not long enough.
No, it's not long enough. I don't know. It's such a troubled life as well, isn't it?
Yeah, troubled genius, I'd say. Might use that word.
I think he is regarded as a genius, right? Among lots of modern comics cite him as an absolute influence, right? So he is like a groundbreaking genius in his art form.
Yeah.
And that was always his motivation, actually. He had these moments in the mainstream and they never satisfied him because he had something to say.
Yeah, he did.
On behalf of other people.
Yeah, and he said it.
Yeah, he did. I need to find one of these albums. When you're going to charity shops and looking for these books, you always see albums. It's all music. I never see any comedy ones.
It'll all be online,
Actually, like we were saying earlier about being able to read these books and go and catch snatches of the routines on YouTube and stuff. Actually, what I've not done ever is listen to a whole act of Richard Pryor in one go, which probably does take you on some kind of journey.
Yeah, that's a really good idea because they'd have actually crafted it like an album to be the whole experience.
Yeah.
Let's do that.
Let's do it.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Thrift Shop Biography. We love making this podcast and we're absolutely thrilled that so many of you are already listening. You could really help us out by leaving us a review somewhere, wherever you listen to this podcast. And if you could share us, tell your friends about us, or drop some links on social media. We have a Facebook page called Thrift Shop Biography, so make sure you come over there to hear about the episodes first and what else we're up to. Okay, see you next week. And if you're new here, there are loads more episodes now to go and listen in the back catalogue, so make sure you go and enjoy them. Okay, thank you very much.